Thanks for listening to the Farmers Weekly podcast. Do remember you can subscribe to Farmers Weekly magazine and get all the latest news, views and market prices by visiting fwi.co.uk.
The relationship between the farming community and government is really critical. And at the moment, there's been a breakdown in the trust and confidence in that relationship, and we need to restore that. And I'm optimistic that there is a way through this.
That's Henry Tufnell, the third Labour MP to publicly support farmers who want the government to back down on inheritance tax. We've an exclusive interview. How farm businesses are adapting to climate change and changes in the farmland market, and why a livestock market is speaking out against keyboard warriors. Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
The Farmers Weekly podcast.
All that and more shortly. But first, it's been another busy week for farmers in London, holding a special Pancake Day Rally against government plans to impose inheritance tax on farming assets worth more than £1 million. Thousands of farmers from across the country descended on the capital on Shrove Tuesday, the 4th of March. Phil Case from Farmers Weekly went along, and while he was there, I got him on the line to tell me what it was like.
Well, Johann, it's been a really colourful rally, this one. There's been thousands of farmers who've travelled the length and breadth of the country to be here. They've come here with a defiant message for Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government. And really, it's been about music. There's been a really big musical theme, eclectic mix of different hits. And Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down, that hit was blaring out from speakers earlier on. And now they've started to chant, "We won't back down, we won't back down." And that's right in front of Westminster, in front of the parliamentary building here. They're walking in unison. There's a lot of determined people here. I'm seeing that there's Conservative politicians right at the front. I can see Robbie Moore and Victoria Atkins. They're kind of the cheerleaders for this rally. And really, they see this as the last chance before the spring budget to try and have an impact on this government and try and get them to change their mind. But really, it's the last roll of dice this spring, and farmers are going to get busy. And then they feel that this is a great opportunity to send a message to the government.
And farming families across the generations coming to this Pancake Day Rally, Phil, young and old.
Absolutely that. In actual fact, there's two boys here I spoke to, 12-year-old boys. They travelled from Bicester. They live in Banbury on a family farm, and they understand the seriousness of this situation. One of the boys said to me that, his name was Monty, one of them said to me he worries about his future because all he wants to do is farm. He wants to take over the reins of the business, and he's obviously had conversations with his dad. His dad has explained the significance of this whole policy. And really, it's this anxiety, this worry that the whole of the industry is beset by at the minute. And they're really telling this government that they need to look again at this policy and change their mind. And at least have a consultation, which is what they should have really done in the first place.
That's Farmers Weekly's Phil Case. Now, the government says it's not for turning when it comes to inheritance tax, but some of its own MPs are publicly supporting farmers. Among them, Henry Tufnell, MP for Mid and South Pembrokeshire. I called him up and asked him why he had decided to speak out.
The relationship between the farming community and government is really critical. We can't achieve the growth that we need. We can't hit our environmental targets without them. We need to bring them with us on this journey. And at the moment, there's been a breakdown in the trust and confidence in that relationship. And when I speak to farmers in my constituency in Pembrokeshire, it's clear that the changes to the inheritance tax that are announced in the budget are causing them huge anxiety. And we need to listen to them, and we need to restore that relationship, because fundamentally there's been a breakdown in the trust and confidence of that relationship.
Henry, you're from a farming family. You understand the challenges around farming. You understand the challenges around this policy. The Treasury, though, it simply isn't engaging with the industry on this issue. What's your advice to farmers who are trying to get that message across to government, who are trying to get that engagement and build that bridge to make things better?
Look, I want there to be an opportunity for constructive engagement. That's what I want to achieve, and that's what I'm trying to do. And it's particularly important on these two issues. One about the valuation point in terms of the data that I've seen from farmers in Pembrokeshire and the impact that this changes will have on them, and also around the amnesty or transition period for those elderly farmers that are caught in this very difficult situation. And so the key thing now is for the industry, key stakeholders and officials in government to work together and look again at this policy and find a sensible solution, because it's so critical for the government to achieve its growth agenda and also with the environmental targets.
Are you able to have you made successful representations to the Treasury yourself? Are they engaging with MPs such as yourself, or are they deaf to you as well?
Yeah, so I've been raising my concerns with Treasury, and I'm going to continue to do that. And I'm optimistic that there is a way through this, and there's a way to rebuild that relationship between the farming industry and the government.
You say optimistic, and I'm sure a lot of our Farmers Weekly podcast listeners will be really encouraged by that. As I understand it, there are also other Labour MPs who think similarly to yourself, but who haven't gone public, as it were.
Yeah, so I'm not alone in having these concerns. There are colleagues who represent rural areas who are also having those dialogues with farmers in their constituencies. And, as I said before, we all want a good, positive working relationship between the industry and the government. And I'm hoping that by taking these steps that I've done, I can help facilitate the rebuilding of that relationship.
That's Labour MP Henry Tufnell, and before him, Farmers Weekly's Phil Case at the Pancake Day Rally. Louise, Hugh, you were also there while I was locked up here in the Farmers Weekly podcast studio. How did you find the day?
Well, there was no shortage of resolve there amongst the attendees of this march. It was a peaceful and good-natured occasion, like the last one was. It was lovely that it was in the sunshine and we didn't get cold and wet. But these are farmers and their families and representatives who aren't going to go away anytime soon. There was plenty of messaging, as I said, no shortage of resolve, representation from all four corners of the UK. So that was good to see. And hopefully it will have had quite an impact.
And some big arable kit there as well. Some big shiny machines of the size and scale that I guess you're not really used to down in Surrey, Hugh.
No. Yes, on my small holding in Surrey. There was a demonstration. They had a combine harvester, Ollie's combine that he's done the big John O'Groats run with. They had the combine harvester there leading the parade or the march. But parked up on Whitehall, they had a sugar beet harvester and a forage harvester and a fast track with a Pronto Verdestad drill on it, beet or maize drill, and a Bateman sprayer, brand new Bateman sprayer. And they were just highlighting the whole CapEx thing, the amount of money, 3 million quid's worth of kit sat there, the amount of money and risk that is tied up in producing, a pancake or whatever food stuff you want. So, yeah, that was a really good highlight. It was, excellent spirits. I mean, real coming together. We had all four farming union presidents address the crowd from Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Tom Bradshaw, of course, from the NFU. We had Victoria Vivian from the CLA. And it was just a unified message. We're not going away. We're going to keep tapping away. The numbers that turned out, I think, were pretty impressive, given that it was that really stunning day, first good work day for many farms. And yeah, despite that, people, as Louise said, people came from all over. I saw some ladies there in Garstang show gilets. There was people representing the uplands. There was people from the West Country. There was people from Scotland. So people had come from all over, really, to push this issue and keep this issue alive and relevant.
And the government's still not engaging with the industry on this issue, but we also heard from Henry Tufnell, Labour MP for Mid and South Pembrokeshire, telling us here on the Farmers Weekly podcast that he is making representations to the Treasury and that he's optimistic that a solution can be found and that eventually the Treasury will rebuild the trust that it has lost with farmers, Louise.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that he's optimistic. I hope we all feel that way. I'm not sure that everybody does at the moment. Yes, he's absolutely right that the government needs to reconnect with farming. They've never been further apart at the moment. So I'm totally on board with that message. Building that trust again, it's not going to be easy, is it? So be interested to know how he thinks they can do that. But yeah, we need these Labour MPs to start speaking out now, don't we? So very good to hear from him.
And Hugh, Henry Tufnell saying that he doesn't expect the whole thing to be abandoned, but it's about having an amnesty, having a review and trying to find a way forward, especially for this generation of older farmers who are going to die in their boots, as it were, post-2026 and incur this hefty inheritance tax bill. We really need an amnesty or a way forward for that older generation.
Yeah, look, this has never been properly consulted on, has it? And we've always said this, had this been consulted on properly, had they come to industry and said, look, there's these huge glaring loopholes there, we're not happy about this, this and this, we're thinking of doing this, we might have got to the point where, they presented that clawback the other week, a workable policy going forward. So this is definitely not dead in the water. There is loads to play for here, whether we are judging ourselves via the finance bill in the autumn, which obviously puts everything that's going to come into taxation law the following April into law. That's the next big benchmark. Tom Bradshaw made a very good point today when he was addressing the crowd. He was on farm yesterday. He was talking to a supporting, I don't know which MP it was, but it was a supporting MP who said, I've got 400 odd farmers in my constituency. I've only had letters from 20. Okay. So lobby, lobby, lobby. If you are listening to this podcast and you have not written to your local representative, regardless who or what or whatever colour they are, you must do that, and you must do that now. And perhaps you must do it again through the summer and perhaps again in the autumn, because we have got to get these MPs on side, particularly if you are in a marginal Labour constituency. I think there was some polling work done the other week which said, based on the current feeling within rural seats, up to 150, 160 Labour MPs could lose their seats. There is nothing more harrowing than being a one-trick, one-term MP. So it is all about getting those people on side. And then the other people, which I need to do where I am in Surrey, and other colleagues who are around London, around Birmingham, around Liverpool, around Manchester, around Glasgow, and on and on and on. We need to get as many Labour urban MPs out and on to farm and just to tell them our story. Some of them are going to ignore us. We know that. But equally, there are many who are happy to engage and will engage if we give them the conduit to do so. So those are the things we need to be doing and doing lots of between now. And particularly while we're busy, it's going to be busy now. So we haven't got time for doing big marches and tractor runs and everything else. So it's doing that lobbying in your time through the busy periods of the spring and the summer and into the autumn, because there is still loads to play for.
Everything's still to play for then. A positive message from Hugh on what really felt like a sunny spring day, Louise.
Yes, very much so. And another really important thing I think that came out of today is a united we stand message. Everybody was there speaking with one voice. This is so important as we go forward now. There has been a bit of debate about, are we doing the right thing? Should we ramp up the action? Whatever. It really is a case of sticking together and keep moving forward on this. That's how you're going to make progress.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Discover Kubota's M7004 series, which celebrates a decade of exceptional innovation in Kubota's flagship tractor lineup. The new M7004 features a 6.1-litre, 4-cylinder Kubota engine with up to 175 horsepower and offers a choice of power shift or updated KVT transmission. It is equipped with advanced auto guidance, smart farming technologies and TIM, Kubota's tractor implement management for semi-autonomous operations. Key updates enhance operator convenience, including the ability to set cruise control speed without moving, an automatic assisted parking brake, and an improved K-monitor for expanded functionality. For more information about the new M7004 series, visit www.kubota.co.uk or contact your local Kubota dealer today.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, making sure your farm business can cope with extreme weather is becoming increasingly important. So says the latest climate change adaptation report by the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, the AHDB. This is a long-term thing, of course, but it comes amid another reminder that our climate is indeed changing. UK temperatures this week hit 15 degrees, warmer than Madrid and Barcelona, and it's only the first week of March. Here's Rachel Madeley-Davis, the AHDB's Head of Environment.
What we want to start doing is to get sort of farmers and other stakeholders to start thinking that actually climate adaptation is the other side of the coin from climate mitigation. And in many ways, we've probably been a bit preoccupied with climate mitigation. And so we should be on that journey. But at the same time, we need to make sure that we're adapting our farm businesses and our supply chains to adapt to really changing climate.
What you seem to be saying, Rachel, is that farm businesses need to make sure they're more resilient to things like extreme weather. We talk a lot about resilience at Farmers Weekly, and I can imagine that when we do, some people throw their hands up in despair and say, here we go again, all about resilience. We're tired of hearing about it. We're already doing a lot of these things, if not all of them.
Yeah, and I think this is it. And I think a lot of farmers are already doing some of the stuff that we talk about in the report, but perhaps they don't see it through that climate adaptation lens. And I think the report, it's about getting farmers to start to see that actually what they're doing, and also what they perhaps need to do more of, is about assessing the risks that are associated with climate change and how they might need to adapt their businesses this year, next year, or 5-10 years' time. And it's about really sort of thinking about what mechanisms they can do easily and cost effectively at farm level to make their businesses more resilient for a changing climate.
And for people who want to take a look at that climate change adaptation report, we'll put a link to the report to the AHDB website on the show notes page of this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast, Rachel.
Yes, so the full report and also links to any relevant AHDB pages and resources will all be on our website.
That's Rachel Madeley-Davis from the AHDB. Now, farming advisors and professionals say it makes financial sense to make your farm business and indeed your farmhouse more resilient to climate change. Here's Jenny Wilden from solicitors Shakespeare Martineau.
I think we've reached a point where we can't ignore climate change anymore when we're addressing our land holdings. So looking at some of the options that they could consider, we've got sort of alternative heat with air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps. Permitted development rights would apply, meaning that full planning wouldn't be needed for those. They can look at better insulation, damp proofing. Again, in most cases, you wouldn't need planning permission for that where it's internal. Obviously, listed buildings potentially being different, but that would apply across the board. Then they can look at energy generation in terms of solar, wind. Some of the larger holdings are obviously even gone for their own sort of water flow source heating as well. Solar for water is a good option for dwellings, and the solar is quite interesting for those that have got lakes or ponds as part of their holding. That can generate even more if you can put floating solar panels on the water source itself. And then where water's actually going to be an issue in the future, the other things that can be considered is in the designs, whether larger guttering and rainwater harvesting are great ways to be able to address any water shortage issues you might have on farm.
That's Jenny Wilden from solicitors Shakespeare Martineau. Hugh, Louise, a lot coming down the track for farmers when it comes to not only climate change mitigation, but also climate change adaptation. We're all going to have to change.
Yeah, and we've had the Beef and Lamb Roadmap also published by the HDB as well. Loads going on the climate front. I wouldn't say there's more clarity there. I would say there's more possibly, certainly with the Climate Change Committee and their, 7th or 8th, I think it's the 7th carbon budget that they published, the farming bit. There's still plenty of challenges in there, but there's definitely some movement in the sense of actually seeing, being more pragmatic. A lot of the stuff that we've been telling Climate Change Committee and government for years and years and years, whether we're talking about how we calculate emissions, how we calculate the impact of methane and all that sort of stuff, all of those messages that we've been saying for ever and ever and ever, they're actually listening a bit, which is really good news. But what it also means is that we've got to sort of buckle down and get the detail right and work out what's going. It's the same old message I've been saying forever till I'm like a stuck record, annoying the proverbial out of everyone. You've got to get down to it in your business. You've got to drill down. You've got to analyse. You've got to measure it. But the means by which you measure it and are judged by, you could argue, made some progress this week, and they're in a slightly better place. I'm thinking specifically about livestock businesses here than they probably were a week ago. But there's still going to be big changes. There's still got to be cuts to numbers. With that, we're talking about animals or the amount of emissions produced. But there are plenty of solutions out there as well.
And Louise, challenges for arable growers as well. We know about the challenging autumns that there have been, but the Met Office confirming that January 2025, unexpectedly the warmest on record, and the outlook suggests that it's going to be one of the 3 warmest years for global temperatures this year as well. And then this week we've seen temperatures in the teens, and it's only the first week of March. Things are getting warmer, even if we have had the occasional frost.
Yes, well, things are warm, but things are also wet. And it's been that rainfall, flooding and waterlogging, which has really posed some problems for arable farmers, and I'm sure for livestock farmers as well. So, you get 2 sort of prongs of this here. There might be damage actually to the assets on your farm, but there will definitely be damage to the productivity of your farm when you're coming up against events like that. And they're quite unpredictable, as we know. So, different challenges. This isn't a new topic. We've been talking about this in Farmers Weekly, certainly for quite some years now. Obviously, the soil and the health of your soil and the state of your soil really matters on an arable farm, because we need to get these water infiltration rates up when it's very heavy rainfall time. But then we also need to make sure that we can retain that water for the drier times, which will inevitably come as well. So soil health, soil organic matter, that's a really, really important thing on arable farms. And then further down the line, obviously, as climate change keeps moving and changing, we might be looking at different rotations and some different crops. But here and now, warm is one thing, but it's the wet that has been really challenging us for the last 2 or 3 years.
And Rachel Madeley-Davis from the Agriculture and Horticulture Development Board, in this new AHDB report, saying that farmers have to make their businesses more resilient, cover all bases, whether it's warm, wet, hot, cold, whatever nature might throw at us, Hugh. It is, to a certain extent, though, pretty obvious stuff, though, isn't it?
It is obvious. It is obvious. But making your business resilient. Look, good farm businesses through decades, through generations, through centuries, good farm businesses have always been resilient. One thing farmers can do is they can turn and burn on a sixpence and adapt and move. Sometimes they're a bit, begrudging and a bit slow, and they don't like being poked with a stick. They like to discover it themselves and think they're the first one to do it, so they do it quicker. But farm businesses have always been able to do that. We've just got to get perhaps better at doing it. And I think the key thing now is you've really got to engage with the data and with the numbers. And I know that sounds really geeky and really dull, but in the past we've done it, this works better, because we haven't had to, I suppose, have so much attention to detail on that. It's been good if you have done, but you've sort of got away without doing it. Whereas now all of those numbers really mean something. And why the numbers mean so much when we're talking about, say, for example, the emissions profile of your business is, for all too long, I think all of the rule book and all of the numbers that we've been talking about around all the various sectors of agriculture, actually, not just my beef sector I work in, but arable, whatever sector, they're all based on a huge number of old averages. And I've said this before, and for far too long, we have been judging our businesses against really old data. And the reason that new data is slow to come forward is because everyone is really slow at bringing it forward. I mean, there's a really good example we had on the podcast the other week, with the Fen Soil guys, and the fact that they could have taken the average, the big law of averages, and said, oh, yes, we must abide by these cuts and do this. But they didn't. They went out and they drilled down and they found their own data and they found where they needed to be. So that's what we've all got to get really good at. And actually, that's the priority now, is to get that really good, because then we can start to see really what the long-term rule book is going to look like and how, therefore, we have to adapt our businesses.
Yeah, there are probably some differences between red meat and arable. I think the data thing is we're getting better. We've still got a way to go, but I think there is going to be more harmonisation of data, more common standards. I think it's recognised that that's needed, and we've already seen some movement on that. So that's good. We need to keep that going. We need to get this agreement on the right data and what we need. As you say, Hugh, a really good example with Fenland Soils, where they've gone out and got their own data because it just wasn't there. So I think that's probably quite a unique setting. I think there is some quite good data out there now, and then everyone's just got to believe it, use it, and make sure that they are moving in the right direction.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
After favourable drilling and establishment conditions last autumn, your mind will soon be turning to disease control in cereal crops. Growers looking to fulfil the potential of their wheat crop this spring should prioritise a robust and reliable fungicide programme focusing on septoria and rusts. Applied at either the T1 or T2 timing, Corteva's Univoc fungicide is consistent, proven, robust and reliable, giving growers the best chance of enhancing yield and optimising the return on their investment. Find out more about Univoc, that contains Corteva's unique Inatrek active molecule, at corteva.co.uk/Inatrek.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us, podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm, followed by your message to 88440. Louise, messages this week?
Not really messages, but I've had some very positive comments, particularly from one farmer who said how much he's been enjoying the podcast. He also made the point that a lot of people listen to it who might not be involved in farming directly, but they have an interest in farming and they use it to keep themselves up to date and discover what's going on in farming at the moment. So that was a very nice conversation to have.
Always good to have a nice conversation. I think everybody enjoys a nice conversation, especially with all the things that are going on in the world. A not so nice conversation, though, this week, Hugh, on social media.
Yeah, Kibbles, the auctioneers down in Exeter, put up a Facebook post late on Sunday evening, about 7 o'clock, saying that the fat stock market the next day was to be cancelled because of an APHA incident. Which, as you can imagine, you saw a lot of it, Johann. I didn't see that much of it. There was a lot of social media jungle drumming to the point where it almost went into overdrive.
Well, I wouldn't say almost, Hugh. I think it did go into overdrive, the rumour mill. Look, an APHA incident, Animal Plant Health Agency incident, that's the government body that looks after animal disease. It wasn't long until some bright spark decided that this was going to be foot and mouth, and printed as much or typed as much on social media and Facebook. And, speculation like that isn't helpful to anybody. And fair play to Kibbles, who played it absolutely by the book, awaited the test results, which turned out to be negative, a false alarm. The nearest thing was probably twin lamb disease. And the market was able to reopen on the Tuesday. A really, really emotional 36, 48 hours for Kibbles, as auctioneer Russell Steer said on Facebook when he thanked everybody for standing by the market.
We don't want to spark panic throughout the country. It would have been massively irresponsible of us. Others seem happy to do that and then backtrack later in the day. Let's wait until we've got the full facts, shall we, before we start being a keyboard warrior or some sort of hero on Facebook. Wait until we've got the full facts and then we'll come out with it, okay? Take care of what you type. There's people's feelings and livelihoods out there, okay? We're all just humans at the end of the day trying to make a living. So think about your effects and what you put on social media. Thank you for your time and your patience today.
That's auctioneer Russell Steer of Kibbles at Exeter Market. Hugh, a really, really emotional time for Russell and the team, and indeed the farmers at Exeter Livestock Mart.
Yeah, it was, and it was a suspected foot and mouth case. Obviously, everyone's on high alert because of what happened in Germany back in January, and quite rightly so. And then with that comes, it just seems an immeasurable amount of conspiracy BS and mudslinging when everyone actually just needs to take a deep breath, step back, and wait and see what actually comes out. But I think Kibbles, as you say, I think they did a phenomenal job, hugely disruptive to their business as well, because their normal Monday market, they were told, boom, you're not having it the night before. And they actually had to turn people away that obviously aren't into social media, that turned up on Monday morning, bless them. They had APHA and trading standards there, turning farmers away. So massively disruptive to them. And all of that crazy social media speculation really didn't help. But I suppose it was entertaining and clickbait for someone, wasn't it, Johann?
Clickbait maybe, but certainly not entertaining for the people involved or for anybody with any kind of farming sensibility. You know, people just need to rein it in, don't they?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's a bit of a wider point here in that is this actually how we respond to things now? But really, this was the rumour mill getting out of control. It's not the first time it's happened. It probably won't be the last time. But when it's coming to an industry that's been battered recently with too much bad news and things going wrong, it just wasn't really needed, was it? But perhaps that's just an observation of how we do respond to things like this now.
Well, exactly, Louise. It's not an easy time for the industry. It's not an easy time for livestock markets. And I think Kibbles handled this really, really well. Hugh, the markets more widely, what's happening?
Thank you, Johann. The finished steer average this week, dead weight 642.20. It's up about 5-6p, 636 last week. The live weight average actually edges back slightly, 359.1. Back from 359.4 last week. On to the sheep, live weight average SQQ 738 dead. That's up about 1.1 pence on last week. The live weight average drops back slightly to 34470, back from 34580. Pig price SPP average for the UK 203.28. That is back marginally last week from 203.91. On to the arable markets. Feed wheats dropped back this week, I'm afraid. 168.60, back from 176.40. Milling wheat also drops back, 189.25, back from £202. Feed barley is £153.70. That's dropped back a few pence. Oilseed rape drops back about 15 quid, or just over actually, nearly 16 quid back this week to £414.10. Feed peas drop back to £213.70. Feed beans are £214.10. They're back about £6 on the week. If you're filling up the tractor with diesel this week, the Wednesday morning ring round tells us you should be paying an average of around 72.68 pence per litre. That is up about 2 or just over 2p on the week.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, we've not done anything about the farmland market here on the Farmers Weekly podcast, not for quite a while anyway. And with all the changes going on in agriculture, we thought it was about time we did. Climate change, changes in farm policy, environmental schemes, and of course the inheritance tax announcement. Surely all of this must be affecting land prices. Or is it? We spoke to Simon Goodram from Land Agents Cheffins, and I started by asking him whether the market had been affected by the IHT announcement. Here he is.
Well, there's certainly a lot of discussion going on about it, and I think, you know, clearly a significant policy shift that we saw in the autumn budget, that inevitably is going to have an impact on the markets. But of course, there's a lot of other factors which do impact land value other than just inheritance tax.
And when you say other factors, yes, location, as we know, always important, but also increasingly environmental credentials.
Over the last few years, certainly we've seen increased demand from environmental investors, but of course it is quite site-specific and location-specific, and there's a number of sort of micro criteria which need to be applied to that type of the land market. So it's not suitable for all land types by any means. So whilst there is increased demand and inquiries, as I say, it is quite a site-specific market for particularly for elements like biodiversity net gain. That needs to comply with the relevant site criteria, particularly from the specific local authority that sits within. Carbon is a bit more of an open market. That's more applicable to a wider range of land types. But both of those markets, the carbon market and the biodiversity net gain market, they're still very much in their infancy. And there isn't a great deal of evidence of what those units are selling for and how that market's going to mature. So whilst we are seeing interest and demand, I think there's still a long way to go for that market to mature.
And I guess BNG, that's a very long-term commitment as well, 30-odd years in some cases.
It is, yeah. Typically, we would see a requirement for a 30-year commitment. And that again, that's the demand for the market for those end units, the BNG units, is going to be very, very specific in terms of their location and how much development is taking place within that particular local planning authority.
That's the market when it comes to buying and selling land. And what about the rental market for farmland, Simon?
Yeah, again, we're seeing some downward pressure certainly on farmland rents. We've had the basic payment scheme withdrawn earlier than anticipated. We've seen a reduction in grant availability in terms of environmental grants available to farmers. And we're seeing increased volatility still in the produce markets and the markets for variable inputs. So there is still a lot of pressure on certainly the arable sector, and so we're anticipating a downward movement on rents generally.
Simon Gooderham from Land Agents Cheffins. Now we're joined now by Ed Rout from Ceres Property. Ed, we heard earlier in the podcast about resilience, how farmers are adapting to climate change. That's also affecting the land and property market, yeah?
I think it is, yes. I think the farms are looking at a lot of these options in order to make themselves more resilient from impacts of price fluctuations like we saw during COVID with electricity, etc. People are looking at solar panels on the roofs, whether you link that into some battery storage as well on site. As you say, the rainwater harvesting, all options that have been available under the various different capital grant schemes, which we know are on pause at the moment, but hopefully will come back to life shortly. Any of those sort of aspects that do, wholly benefit, the increasing concrete yards, the tracks, the spray, wash down pads, etc., all make for good farms.
I guess it's all about building resilience into the business at a time when things are uncertain and sweating all the assets, as they say.
It is exactly that, and as you say, trying to minimise some of those cash flow peaks and troughs. To not give yourself such a stress when things do change. As you say, the whole thing is about resilience, really. Things are changing. I think it's also the resilience piece is also actually being able to adapt and change quite quickly as the market moves, the grant schemes move. Generally speaking, these are in and out fairly quickly, and if you don't get onto it fairly early, the likelihood is it might get paused like it has at the moment, or it'll go and you completely miss that window. A bit like, we go back 10, 15 years to solar panels when you had feed-in tariffs. Those that have got those in, it was in, out, done, got it. And as you say, that's another, you're making use of roof space that otherwise was generating you no income.
Some people listening to this might be thinking, well, why on earth do I want to increase the value of an asset when we've got this inheritance tax situation hanging over us? But this is also about generating revenue, generating an income.
Yeah, I entirely sympathise with that point. And you might question it, but fundamentally, the day-to-day, you've got to come back to the income generation point of view. Everyone's got to, you've got to function, you've got to live, and the business has got to be as profitable as it can do. And when you're diversifying, trying to spread that risk and not being reliant on one single enterprise, yes, it may have a knock-on consequence further down the line when you get to IHT position. But we've all got, hopefully, 60, 70, 80 years in there where it shouldn't impact on that. And it's the day-to-day income generation, which is key.
Ed Rout from Series Property, thank you for your insight. Thanks for taking the time to speak to us here on the Farmers Weekly podcast. Louise, we're seeing a lot of changes in the farmland market, or at least we're seeing a lot of changes in the factors influencing farmland prices, certainly over the past couple of years.
Yes, I think we are. I mean, the farmland market was extremely active last year. I think the effect of the agricultural transition and some of the restructuring that has had to take place, you were seeing a lot of activity last year. Of course, also the election was looming and people were a bit concerned about what might come out of that, quite rightly, as it turns out. I think it's a bit quieter at the moment because, of course, people are now taking stock, which is not surprising either. So, yeah, people are now taking stock.
I mean, Hugh, to a certain extent, there is sort of a logic to what was said in the audio there, that farms which are doing more green stuff, which are sweating all the assets, they are worth more. I mean, that stands to reason, doesn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it does. Look, it all depends where the benefit of those sweated green assets goes, doesn't it? Because if you sold the BNG off and then you cashed, you banked the money or bought yourself a timeshare in a desert island or whatever, then you're going to benefit from that capital. And effectively, what you're selling on is the 28 years remaining of the BNG liability that person's got to carry on maintaining. So it's just relative to what it is. More's the point, I would say. If you want to go with a green angle, would it not be more pertinent to say that actually this farm is worth more because we've increased the soil carbon and the water retention and the drought tolerance, because of our min-till policy over the last 10 years, our soil carbon's gone up by X. Therefore, this soil is more fertile than it was compared to all the other farms in the area, yada, yada, yada. Particularly if you're in a really rubbish grade 3 desert like Surrey, where I am, where nothing grows and you've got to chuck the kitchen sink at it to get it out the ground. Then it would definitely have an upside value if you were buying it for the business of farming it.
I mean, it's not all that bad, though, in Surrey, though, is it, Hugh? I mean, you've got lots of chimney pots, lots of people coming out of...
it's terrible. It's terrible. It's overpriced. It gets wet. I could go on. But no, I think it is. I can definitely see that there's a line there. All the other greening things as well. I mean, I suppose it depends on the purchaser as well, doesn't it? Because if you've got someone that's buying the farm with the sole purpose of doing something very green and you've already started it with, I don't know, lots of wild bird banks and stuff like that, which again are quite rotational, but there could be an added incentive. But at the end of the day, though, you're going to value the farm based on the bare bones revenue potential of the land, the potential of the soil, and it's going to come back down to that despite how you want to dress it up.
Yeah, I have to agree with you there, Hugh. I mean, soil type and location, really, really important when it comes to whether a farm is going to sell easily and well, aren't they? I mean, a lot of the measures that they were talking about in that audio, whether it's rainwater harvesting, whatever it was, they build in resilience, which is actually much needed and help with the main business, which is production. So I'm not sure that having many of these things on the farm, they are a good thing, but I'm stressing, they are a good thing, but I'm not sure it's going to make a massive difference to the value of the farm.
There you go. Resilient farming, resilient farmland prices. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is about it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. Do remember, you can email us podcast@fwi.co.uk. You can also, if you're in the UK itself, message us by texting the word farm, followed by your message to 88440. We'd love to know what you're up to, especially as the weather gets warmer and field work begins in earnest. Do tell us what you're up to. Louise, lots more tractors out there, certainly in this neck of the woods here on the Essex-Suffolk border. What are you up to next week? Out on farm at all?
Yes, I've got a couple of visits out next week, but as you say, Johann, farmers are going to be very busy out in the fields while this good weather lasts anyway. And I've discovered this week that fungicide prices have finally appeared. So we've been waiting to get those new season prices, and there's been a bit of a cat and mouse game going on, but I'm told that they are now with us. So people can make their plans and people can get on with doing them as well.
Tuesday next week, I'm off to Rothamsted for a Farmers Weekly transition event. In fact, if any listeners would like to come along to that event, if you go to fwi.co.uk/transition, you'll be able to find out all of the details there. We'll be looking at precision breeding and having a bit of a look around. So do come along. That's Tuesday, the 11th of March. Hugh, up to anything good?
I shall be very busy on my farm doing spring work, avoiding Louise, because I'm so busy.
There you go.
No, I don't know. Yeah, just lots of stuff. And it's just busy, isn't it? It's great this time of year. There's loads going on.
Everything's waking up.
Finally, yeah, it stopped raining. It's just amazing forecast at the moment for the next 10 days. And you're thinking, oh my God, is it ever going to rain again? No, I'm already doubting that. No, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. It's good. It's going to be warm. It's going to be warm this weekend. 15 degrees. My God, it's going to be on fire.
Fantastic. Right, that's it for this episode then. Until next week from the Farmers Weekly podcast, I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening.